I want to talk quickly about the keto diet.
Rubbish.
I'm Tim Spector,
best-selling author and medical professor,
with over 1,000 original articles published in the world's top journals.
What would be the biggest pieces of advice you'd give in terms of being able to lose weight? Should we be skipping breakfast?
Well, food is complicated, our bodies are complicated. The key bit is for your gut is to reduce ultra-processed foods. The average person isn't going to do well long term on a keto diet. They can mix these chemicals to fool your brain in a way that we've never evolved to do.
Go on, break the internet.
Okay, so
Thank you so much for joining me today.
pleasure.
Very excited to have you after your long cycle here.
Long sweaty cycle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you do that every day?
I used to pre-COVID. Obviously don't if I'm working at home.
Right.
But yes, going to the hospital, that would be my normal journey. So yeah, I miss it a bit.
Yeah.
It was a nice routine to have beginning, end of the day.
Did you do a lot
De-stress
of
you.
cycling around London when it was completely empty in COVID?
I did, and obviously working on COVID and working
Right.
in the hospital, I could go anywhere, and it was marvellous.
Yeah.
I've never enjoyed cycling more.
Well,
in
yeah,
my
I can
life.
imagine it probably would have been like why couldn't it be like this all the time?
Yeah, like some plague had hit London, and you're the only person, driving across Westminster Bridge, and
Yeah.
it was kind of spooky, but you sort of felt a very special moment. I
Yeah,
guess.
no, I can imagine. I want to go to the start of your career. So our listeners can get a little bit of context over kind of how you got to where you are now, what your motivations are in terms of what you do. So can you just start from the beginning and give us like a whistle-stop tour of what your career's looked like up to now?
Well, we'll perhaps skip the first 18 years of life or my birth and things and just go straight to medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of ended up doing medicine really because I guess my dad convinced me that even if I didn't know what to do, I wouldn't be unemployed.
Was he a doctor?
He was a doctor,
Okay.
yes. He was although a pathologist, he only saw dead bodies, not live people. So I went along with it, and I was a bit of a lazy student, wasn't really into it until I did a bit of research as a medical student. That got me into the idea of research. So I sort of got better as I went on and actually started to enjoy it. So I did general medicine, and I picked a specialty called rheumatology, which is bones and joints, and trained in that to be a consultant specialist in that subject. But on the way, I had to do some research to do a thesis, like a PhD, and did something called epidemiology, so I took a year out, did a master's, and that's about studying populations. So I was always quite much more interested in the why people get disease, and this was at the time I was doing it in the 1980s. The real sort of cutting edge thing to do was to get these studies, work out what the risk factors were. That's how they discovered that smoking causes lung cancer.
In the 1980s?
Well, they did that earlier, but
Right.
it was the group of doctors 20 years before that had actually
Right.
done all that. So they were finding all kinds of things about breast cancer and age of birth, and looking into the contraceptive pill and the risks and things. It was quite an exciting time to do that. So that's what I did, and I spent several years doing that, looking at arthritis. No one had really studied that, and hormones and menopause and arthritis, and what was causing some people to get these rather strange diseases. But then I went back to clinical work because I needed to get a salary, and I was a consultant at St Thomas's Hospital. And then I had the idea of starting a twin register, where the UK's only adult twin register, and it just seemed really cool. It would link my desire to be a sort of medical detective, if you like, and we, through various media appeals, got thousands of twins to come and regularly come to St Thomas's Hospital, just up the road, and now we have 16,000 of these twins. So it's the biggest of its kind in the world, and I've been doing that for 30 years. So that was probably my best idea I've had, I think, was to do that, because it allowed me to first look at nature v nurture, because twins are a perfect natural experiment.
Of course, yeah.
You compare identicals who are clones with non-identicals.
Yeah.
And any difference between them has to be genetic.
Can I quickly ask you, this is purely based on my own TV watching in my spare time. 3 Identical Strangers, was that around this time? Have you seen the documentary?
Yeah, I'd read, I knew the story before I saw the documentary.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're like, I'm not in the popular culture side, I knew about this.
Well, there's always the dark side to twins, and twin researchers have a bit of a bad rap.
Yeah, no, I can understand that probably didn't do a lot for the PR.
Going back to, during the war and all these adoption things that happened in the US and Sweden, where a lot of twins were forcibly adopted. And we had some twins in our group that were adopted at birth by separate parents,
right, and
only met in adulthood and things. So that that doesn't happen anymore. But it was that we had several of them, and super interesting. And that story was, quite spooky. And anyone who's seen that, amazing documentary, absolutely recommend it. Yeah, realize that power of twins and how you're struck by their incredible similarities. Yeah, well, even if they've lived apart.
Yeah, I can 100% see the kind of appeal of looking at that so closely, because I guess it is the only natural, especially cloning. When was Dolly the sheep?
That was in late 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah. So even at that point, it's the natural clone in terms of really being able to study that. I can imagine it's very interesting. But yeah, heartbreaking documentary, and as you say, very spooky. Anyway, that was just me interrupting you purely based on my own interests and documentary watching.
Everyone loves twins, and that's why it was an area that was fascinating research, because you were doing stuff that no one else could do.
Of course, yeah.
Which is always what I've liked to do, is something rather unique, rather than Me Too type research. Even if it fails, it's high risk, it's still sort of fun. So we were looking at lots of diseases and personality traits as well, that no one else had studied. So, we were the first to show that, back pain was 3 times more genetic than breast cancer.
Wow.
And all kinds of diseases that people thought were just old age turned out to have a genetic basis. So lots of things like that. We got in the media, and we did hundreds of these studies, and we also did kind of weird stuff like looking at the genetics of religion to see whether belief in God had a genetic component.
That's so interesting.
Which it does. And we looked at sense of humor. We couldn't find a gene for
really?
No gene for sense of humor, but we also looked at political beliefs and even asked people about Brexit, which was interesting, and found there is a genetic basis for left-wing or right-wing views as well. So a lot of the things that we think are free will have some genetic basis.
Is there an easy way to sum up the genetic predisposition for certain religious beliefs, or no?
To sum it up, well, I think what we showed is that it's not specific religious beliefs, and it's not whether you go to church.
Yes.
It's not your practice.
Yeah.
That's environment.
Of course.
But how spiritual you are as a person, how strongly you believe something that may be unprovable. Yeah. Has about a 40 to 50% genetic influence, and what my hypothesis is that as religion has got less common, it's now below 50% of the population believe in God. It's been replaced by other similar traits, like extreme views on the environment, or veganism, or particular dietary. Who knows, the keto diet, or these personality traits want to belong to some group, right? And I think this is part of our human nature. And so religion was one, but equally there's the genetics, just as strong for atheism. Right. So it's a kind of pack instinct. Yeah, I think that's really what we're looking at. So we've evolved, and religion for a long time was very beneficial for humans, helped survival. So it was a useful trait to have this sort of strong tribal belief in something and want to belong. So that was a sort of nice aside. Of course, I didn't get any funding for any of that, so I couldn't.
Right. They're like, back to work, and you're like,
exactly.
But atheism.
NHS is not going to pay for that, or
I think that's so
or the
interesting.
taxpayer. But often these philosophical ones. We also did stuff on sexuality and the genetics of female sexuality and sexual problems and all these things. So nearly everything we studied ended up having some genetic basis, which was
incredibly interesting.
And we were the first people to ask women about their sexual problems and ability to orgasm and all this kind of stuff that turned out it has struck a strong genetic component, whereas most people think, oh well, it's
environment, it's
totally environmental, it's my fault or whatever it is. But so that really pushed me to say, oh, genetics is everything. But then after having done this for about 20 years on nearly every subject, as you can imagine, I could find, I started looking at why identical twins were so different. And because the weird fact is, although they look so similar, they smile the same way, they pick up their coffee cup the same way, they laugh the same way, they age differently, they die at different times, they get different diseases. One gets cancer, one gets depression, the other one doesn't, etc., etc. Many, many examples of this. And I was just saying, so why? They're clones, genetic clones. They lived 18 years at least together, done virtually everything together. Why would one get cancer and the other one not? It doesn't sort of make sense. So that drew me to looking, and I looked at something called epigenetics, which is how you switch genes on and off with little chemicals, like vitamins can do that, or just stress, emotional stress can do that. But I did that for a few years, but it never really gave me the big results I wanted. It showed small differences, but not the big ones. And it was then that I came across gut microbes, and that for the first time we showed something we could measure in your gut. You measure in a poo sample using genetic methods, the same genetic methods I'd been using. And we realized I'd realized for the first time I'd found something that really wasn't similar at all in identical twins. It was really hardly any different to the random population, whereas everything else had been so closely matched. So suddenly I had a reason to explain why identical twins were reacting differently to the identical environment. And that was a sort of aha moment. I said, wow, this is incredible. We're all incredibly different in this sort of new organ in our bodies that hadn't really been thought about, certainly not 10, 12 years ago when I was starting all this. So that really got me on this journey to really say, I've got to really move all my research away from genes into the gut microbiome, because unlike genes, where you can't really change your parents, you're stuck with them. You can change your gut microbes through food, and so suddenly this was a really actionable area of research, and has that set me up for the next 10 years. So that got me into writing books about it. I wrote a book called The Diet Myth. Started writing that about 10 years ago, and it came out about 2015, which was one of the first books on introducing this whole concept and how that changed our views on diet. And how we've got lots of things wrong because we didn't really account for it. We just treated the body as if it was some little furnace that you put fuel in one end and energy and heat comes out the other end, and it's totally simple. It's all about calories. So the fact that you have this really amazing extra organ in your body, the gut microbiome, was quite illuminating and really changed, I think, the way we think about food and diet and everything else. And that story led me to, I was talking about the diet myth at a meeting 6 years ago in London. Two guys came up to me and said, we'd love to get together and do a company based around this individuality in your microbes, plus this new area of personalized nutrition.
Yeah.
And that's where the company Zoe was formed, which was, the next phase in my career, if you like, that alongside all this research, suddenly I had a company that was willing to fund a lot of the research to get whole personalized nutrition and the gut microbiome into center stage, do the really big studies that I couldn't get done through my normal funding routes. I needed the millions that investors can bring, and also the speed and energy that startup companies do. And so that's where Zoe was born, and that's this personalized nutrition company that's now doing very well in the US and the UK. And that is we've now got 50,000 stool samples from customers who are basically allowing us to do research on all their samples.
Yeah.
And so I'm suddenly very happy with this, and it's allowed me to continue with my area of research, gut health, microbiome. I've written 2 other books in that time, Spoon Fed and more just recently Food for Life, which is really just getting the word out about this new way of looking at nutrition and how everyone needs to forget all the old rules and start afresh, realize that we know so little, we're so badly educated, and these hopefully the tools people need for life, so that they realize that the most important choice they make in their lives every day about their health is actually what to eat. And I don't think people realize they have that power. And I think that's the real big message, that all this focuses around. That's the number one thing, that everyone has power to change their health every day with all the multiple food choices we make.
Right. I mean, it's all incredibly interesting, and I'm very, very excited to kind of try it as well. And yeah, I mean, I've heard all of the kind of incredible stories, your huge waitlist numbers. So, I mean, it's, I think, such an exciting step. I really want to talk about when you kind of first came to these discoveries about the gut. I don't think I heard anything about the gut other than kind of this idea of probiotics in yogurt in kind of advertising when I was little, until, I don't know, a few years ago when it really became the thing. When you first came out with this research, was it just generally not talked about anywhere or kind of in the mainstream?
It wasn't in the mainstream at all. So yeah, when I wrote my first book, Diet Myth, it did quite well, but people had never heard of any of these concepts.
Right.
They'd never heard of fermented milk, kefir, or kombucha, which are now, if you live in places like London, everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
But so things have happened very rapidly, and as you said, I think most people vaguely knew through yogurt advertising that microbes were something that you could eat, you could buy, and basically those. But all you knew is they came in the yogurt, and if you bought it, it was good, and if you didn't, it was bad. But you weren't really told that you had your own set of gut microbes that were really important that you need to look after. I think that was the big difference. And this is because we didn't have the technology to do it. You've got to realize that it's taken 25 years of genetics to do this amazing job so we can detect all these microbes. Before, you had to grow them up on a little plate of food, and that only allowed us to look at 1% of them. Right. Whereas, I mean, just so people know, we're talking about gut microbes, we're talking about 100 trillion individual microbes living inside our guts. If you put them all together, they weigh the same as your brain. Right? So we're a couple of pounds if you put them all together. And they're this huge community of bacteria, viruses, fungi, even parasites that we've all got, that are all individual. Nice. And the best way to think about what they do, because you just think, oh, well, they're just there eating your food, right? That's what we were taught. They're just doing nothing, waiting around the dark for you to eat something. But no, they're mini pharmacies. They're converting that food into really powerful chemicals for your brain, changing whether you're happy or sad. They're also key to your immune system. So most of the immune cells are actually in your whole body are actually lining your gut. So all these little chemicals from the microbes are talking to these immune cells, making sure you don't get food allergy, making sure you don't overreact to things, but also making sure you're primed to deal with infections or early cancers or anything at all. So they're key to that, and of course our digestion, metabolism. They control our weight, our appetite, and they really, we produce only about 20 at most of our own chemicals for our gut, whereas the gut microbes produce thousands of them, and that's so we work and have evolved with them to do that.
Yeah.
So we've never really given them much consideration.
Sure.
And actually, we've been trying to get rid of them.
Yeah.
For most of the last 100 years, we've been worried about them, trying to eliminate them, wiping them out with antibiotics, wiping them out with junk food, and we really haven't given them the dominance. So hopefully, this is the platform. This is the era of our gut microbes, and they can and realize, if they're healthy, then the rest of you is going to be healthy.
Yeah, that's so incredibly interesting. From the beginning, just for someone who's coming into this, not knowing anything about the gut, can you just quickly explain what the gut actually is? Like, is it your stomach? Is it a collection of places? Is it, what is it?
The gut is basically the tube that runs from your mouth to your anus.
Okay, lovely.
Okay, so it's all the bits in between.
Yeah.
So you're right, many people point to their gut
Stomach,
and they
yeah.
only think about the stomach. But it's the whole passage where food is ingested and comes out in the toilet. That's what people that is the gut, and it's made up of all these different bits, and it's several meters long. It varies quite a lot between people, but we're talking, if you rolled it all out, it would be, the size of a tennis court or whatever, because it's got lots of little wrinkly bits and folds. So you've got your mouth, then you've got your gullet, which is your esophagus, which is a little tube that goes down to your stomach. That's where all the acid is. Then it goes to your small intestine, where you get the little squashed up bits of your food then gets digested in the small intestine, and the sugars and things like that get absorbed. All the other stuff, like the fiber in real foods, goes further down into the next bit, which is called the large intestine or the colon, and that's several meters long, and that's where your microbes live, and they eat on the fiber, all the green outer bits of plants, etc., and also some of the fats, and they digest that, and that's where they live, and they produce all the good things. So and then eventually it goes from the large intestine, it just goes down to the rectum, and then out, it gets pooed out as your stool. And every day we poo out about half of our gut microbes. So they have a very fast and furious lifestyle,
Right, I can
they
tell.
have to, they've got to live
stopping for
fast.
them.
They've got to live fast.
Or young.
So we're full of replicating microbes
Right.
all the time, and they're very much part of this whole real key process. But understanding your gut and what it does is really important, because when it comes to food, unfortunately, most of the food we have now is junk food, ultra-processed food. That gets absorbed totally in our small intestine very early, straight into the bloodstream, leaving our microbes hungry.
So for someone who's listening to this and thinking, cool, I need to make my gut healthier, I don't know how, where would be a good place to start? Like, what are the general hygiene things that we can do to maintain or create a healthy gut?
The number of guidelines. The first thing is to eat more diverse plants. Microbes feed off different plants, and we have thousands of different species of them. Each of them is like specially adapted to one type of plant. So if you only have the same prawn salad every day, you won't feed all the different microbes you could be feeding, because we know
me eating mushrooms every single day,
well,
rather than anything
it's
else.
It's good for the mushroom eating microbes.
Yeah,
they'll
the
love
others
it.
are sad,
And I love mushrooms, by the way. They're fantastic.
Great, fantastic.
For your health. But either you need lots of different varieties of mushroom, which will have different different chemicals in them.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are hundreds of species you can eat, and hundreds you can't eat. So, each of those has different chemicals which will keep a little family of microbes alive. So it's the variety they like. That's really important. And so we did some research 5 years ago that showed the optimum for your gut health. And we think gut health is getting a wide variety of species.
Yeah.
That is associated with everyone who's healthy has that look about their microbes, is to have 30 different plants a week. So it's not 30 mushrooms 30 times a day. It's making sure you've got your mushrooms, maybe different types of mushrooms. You've got peppers that can be red peppers, green peppers. It can be different types of bean, black beans, broad beans, white beans. It can be nuts. It can be seeds. Each of them counts as a separate plant. You can have a herb spice, an Indian herb spice, that counts. And it's not as hard as it sounds if you have a varied, and in places like London or whatever, where you've got lots of amazing different varieties of cooking. You've got Middle Eastern cooking or Asian cooking often has a lot of these ingredients anyway. So it's embracing that diversity of plants is the first thing people should do. So rather than having meat and 2 veg or just the same beige food or ultra processed foods, it's this variety. Second thing is to eat the rainbow. So I've talked about some of those colors. The reason is in brightly colored foods, there are these defense chemicals called polyphenols.
Okay.
People will hear more and more about this. It will start to get on packets soon. And this gives it both a bright color, but also the bitter taste.
Okay.
And so often a good example is extra virgin olive oil. I don't know if you like olive oil, but everyone should use extra virgin olive oil if they're interested in their health, right? No other cooking oil comes close because it's got a bright color and it's bitter if you drink it, and it even some peppery can make you sort of cough. That's because of the polyphenols. And so that's a good example. Just like nuts also have that, or even red wine. If you drink red wine, strong red wine, it's got tannins in it. That's polyphenols, and that's why of all the alcohol, red wine is the only one that's been shown to be good for your gut microbes.
Thrilled with that news. On the extra virgin olive oil thing, I have been told, how it's in darkened bottles? I thought you shouldn't be cooking with extra virgin olive oil. You should be using it cold because if you heat it, it's carcinogenic.
That's rubbish. Really?
I tell everyone that. So if that gets out, it's actually purely because of me.
Yeah, well, you've got to read that chapter in my book. So I talk about this.
That's my fun fact. I'm not going to have to find a new one.
Yeah, well, again, it's, we've got to move away from this, this food causes cancer, this food makes you live forever, this is great for your sex life. It's like we're often taking one chemical out of 800 and saying that if you put that in a lab or you give enormous amounts of that chemical to poor old rats, that the equivalent of giving someone 1,000 times the human dose, you get cancer. So all those artificial studies are worth nothing.
Right, because they're in isolation.
They're in isolation. They were done in small numbers, or it was done by the sunflower oil manufacturers to wipe out their rivals. Right. So there is no evidence at all that olive oil has any cancerogenic properties. And you might be referring to the idea that if you burn oil, if you wok fried, you superheated your olive oil, right? Yeah. But basically, its smoke point is around 200 degrees, which is usually well above your frying levels.
Yes, I'm not that.
And so only if you're doing really, stir fry Asian food, yes, maybe then you don't have it. But generally the smoke point is low, and even if it did have that smoke point above it where you start to see a funny coloured in theory that's carcinogenic, but in reality no one's really shown it's a problem. I mean, the main proof is that you've got thousands of people in studies being given either extra olive oil or nothing, and the ones with extra olive oil always do better in every single study long term for health, cancer, heart disease, whatever. So it's rubbish.
So stop spreading that. Yeah,
stop
sure.
spreading the rumour. Everyone should be using extra virgin olive oil for not only their salads but also their cooking. They shouldn't be using a lot of these other highly refined olive oils that are much less stable, much more likely to cause you problems with your health and your gut. Much worse for the planet as well. Right.
Okay. Well, it's actually good news for me, because despite having lost my fun fact, I actually was cooking with extra virgin olive oil for a very long time and then was told this. The darkened bottles then, this really backed up my claim. So do you know why they're in darkened bottles?
To stop them oxidizing, so that they don't, the fat, because there's a lot of fat in olive oil, doesn't go rancid.
Okay.
So it's basically to protect it from sunlight.
Sure.
Which would accelerate that process. So you can't have olive oil last for years in your cupboard. You need to use it up. You can smell it and you can tell generally it's gone off. And you shouldn't really buy olive oil in clear bottles, and you should store it out of the sun.
Okay.
That's the reason. It's just to keep it fresh and stop it going moldy, really.
Okay, great.
It doesn't mean it's going to be deadly.
Yeah, no, incredibly helpful.
But it's a great example of these sort of food myths.
Yeah, sure.
And how, I don't know, reading the Daily Mail or whatever, you know too much.
That is not where I got it from, just FYI.
But I'm sure you can. 1 week it saves you from cancer, the next week.
Sure.
The same thing's about coffee. That was another thing that even I wrote an article when I was young saying that coffee causes cancer.
Right.
I was guilty of one of those.
Retract that statement.
I was totally wrong, and it's now obvious that coffee is a health food, and
fantastic. It's
really good for your gut microbes because it's got polyphenols in it, and that's why it's bitter, and it's made from a fermented bean. So it's actually, it's one of your 30 plants a week. And all the studies now show it reduces heart disease and increases longevity. So, it's really important to not take one study out of context, as the press often do. You've got to look at all the studies together, do something called a meta-analysis. You summarize them, but also putting it in the light of how it affects our gut microbes generally helps you realize whether it's good or bad. If it helps your gut microbes, it's always going to be good for you. And so you logically start to think of, is it diverse? Is it whole food? Is it brightly colored? Has it got these polyphenols? Is it fermented? If it's fermented food, which means it's got live microbes in it, like your yogurt, like good quality cheeses, like your kefir, kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, then that's going to be good for you and good for your gut. And that's been now proven. It actually helps your immune system, reduces inflammation, and they're the sort of key positive things. Then there's a few things to avoid. So the other is to help your gut, avoid eating overnight. So reduce your eating time. I don't know, do you eat late at night?
Sometimes when I've come back from work late, I do eat around, I'll eat an hour before I go to bed, which I know is bad. And my heart rate monitor tells me it's bad as well, because it calls me out on it in the morning.
So, we all have busy work and sometimes you've got to eat and whatever. You can't. But if you just in the morning delayed your breakfast so that you had at least 12 hours between eating episodes, and ideally 14, we're doing studies now that showing that's pretty good for most people. And giving your gut a rest is really important.
So if you end up having a late dinner, then have a later breakfast.
Correct. And that's what, if you ever go to Italy or Spain, you can't get an early dinner and you sit down to eat, and but they don't have breakfast. They would have, an espresso and a cigarette. I'm not saying I'll have the cigarette, but you know what I mean? So it's not a big deal. They don't sort of say, we can't go to work without it. And they would have something at, 11. Maybe they have, a snack at 11 with their next coffee.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm very much Italian.
So people just need to realize that, if you focus on what your gut wants, then you can't go that far wrong. So I think that's really important. The other thing is, the key bit is for your gut is to reduce ultra processed foods. 60% nearly of all the calories taken in the UK are now ultra processed, and most people don't know what an ultra processed food is. They wouldn't
what
recognize
qualifies?
So there are lots of different definitions, and this is part of the problem, and they don't have to say it on the packet. So it's up to the consumer to actually call it out. Generally, if it's in a packet and it's got health claims, it's usually it claims to be healthy, it's an ultra processed food. That's the very simplistic way of doing it.
Yes.
There are always exceptions, but you don't get health claims on an apple.
Yeah. They do their marketing themselves.
But if you had a sort of apple puree or a puree spread for children or something, it would say this is one of your 5 a day. It's got vitamin C in it. It's because they're disguising the fact that it's fake food. They're basically ultra processed food is when they take some of the ingredients that are natural and they recreate it artificially to save them money or to get a health label so that they can reduce the fat content. So they reduce the fat content artificially by taking something out of the milk, for example. So you only use milk powder, and then you add in other stuff like starches or glues or gums to give it some similar feel in the mouth. And everything's always cheaper.
Yeah.
And so it's that substituting. So it's when you see a list of ingredients that you wouldn't have in your kitchen, things like modified starches, xanthan gums, emulsifiers, lecithins, carrageenans, preservatives, all these things that, or various lists of artificial sweeteners, which are increasingly common, and they say low sugar, low calorie, but it's packed with all these chemicals. Now, we've in the past thought they were safe for us, but it turns out they're not. So most people think artificial sweeteners are inert and harmless and a good thing to have because they're avoiding sugar. But we've been misled, and increasingly we're sold these mixtures of chemicals in our foods as routine, and we don't even think to look anymore, whereas all of these products, which we eat more of than any other country in Europe, are being given to us, our children, being served in institutions, in hospitals, schools, and we now know that they are probably the main cause of the obesity crisis in this country. Not because of the fats, the sugars, the calories, which we've been told, because the manufacturers can get around that by producing low versions of that, but these foods have been shown to make us overeat. And so eating the identical food that's made in a factory using these sort of fake ways of reproducing it versus the actual original food, huge differences you can see in how full they make you and how much you want to keep eating more. We've all known that with certain snack foods. There's some brilliant ones that taste incredible. You just say, I can't stop eating that. I've got to keep getting those snacks back into me. That's because of they can mix these chemicals to fool your brain in a way that we've never evolved to do. And that's why the UK is the most obese country in Europe, and it's just getting worse. And it costs the country and the taxpayer, I think it was close to about 60 billion pounds a year.
That's a whole lot of money. Which
is a lot of money that taxpayers are paying for to subsidise basically junk food's effect on our health system.
Just quickly, what would you then suggest are the legislation changes that need to be made in order to encourage, whether it's in like food labelling, whether it's in any of that would educate better on these types of things? Because it sounds like a lot of what we assumed to be true 15 years ago perhaps isn't true, and the legislation maybe hasn't caught up with it.
We'll first have to stop effectively subsidizing these fake food companies.
Right.
Because through a lot of the farm subsidies, they get lots of benefits that way. But I think we need transparency, first of all. So we need a independent group that would set up and say, okay, we're defining this as ultra processed, and it should have a black label on it saying this is ultra processed food. It should come with a health warning, like cigarettes, saying this will make you overeat by 10% every day, for example, or 15%, whatever the exact figure is. And so you're given a warning on it, rather than this is health. They shouldn't be allowed to have health claims on those packets. I've got no problem with people eating, a Mars bar or a Coke or a Pepsi, because they're not good for you.
Yeah, sure.
Perfectly fine to have treats that but to falsely label all of this food as healthy when it's killing us, it just seems to be totally wrong. So it's just not an easy solution to change the financial system. The sugar tax could have been expanded easily to include artificial sweeteners and artificial foods, so that the relative balance between real food and junk food was less, because it's getting bigger every year. It's getting harder to buy fresh fruit and vegetables for the same price as you can buy something made by robots in a factory. But that would have been a start, is to expand that. But again, the food companies are so powerful, they will lobby against it. That's why you never hear anything about this, which is one of the biggest disasters of our time. As we're growing up, we've never seen so many obese children that we have. Never saw it when I was at school, and it's happened relatively recently. The idea of snacking is a new phenomenon. The average Briton has 6 or 7 eating episodes a day, and this is now considered the norm. Okay, what's your snack? What's your preferred snack? You go to Italy and Spain, they don't even understand the concept. They have proper meals. Yeah. And that's what we need to get back to, is this idea that we don't need to eat little and often. We need just decent meals, sitting down, probably not at your desk, which is the current thing that we're all guilty of. The French spend twice as long eating meals as we do in the UK. And so it's also how you eat is really as important as what you eat, and looking at it, not eating in front of the telly, is where you tend to overeat.
Really being called out here.
Well, we all do this stuff, right? And I do as well. I had a TV dinner last night, right? I'm not saying I'm perfect, right? But I think you need to know what is
and then
what is right and wrong, and then make your own decision transparently. And everyone can make their own mind up. But the fact that we know so little about nutrition and food, and no one's taught to cook properly in school anymore. Many people cannot cook.
I would have loved to have food tech in school. I think it's very important to make sure that it is both the boys and the girls doing the food tech, but I agree that we shouldn't be getting to, people talk about university almost as the first time you learn to cook food. Thankfully,
first time boiling eggs. Some of my
I was
friends.
astounded by how many people didn't know how to cook. I have kind of cooked for myself since I was 13 or something, so I'm kind of pretty proficient. But in terms of, I could not believe how many people, YouTubing boiling an egg.
Well, everyone should be able to cook 5 meals before they leave school. Surely that's a better life skill than algebra.
Well, I'd agree. And that's coming from the scientist. I studied music, so I can't say anything.
No, but, there are many things we learn at school that are useless for 99.5% of us. And there's some skills, like whether it's touch typing or it's learning how to cook 5 dishes, tell us about life and how to do a tax return and these things.
God, I would have needed that.
Not be frightened of forms and things. So I think learning stuff in school, we're going to have chatbots anyway doing all this for us. We need to do some of these practical things. And that's really educating people about food, I think, is really important. And learning how to cook is a key part of it, because you do find that if you're actually touching food, or children are touching food all the time, they get to know it. They've done horrendous surveys saying most children don't know, where chicken comes from, or the difference between fish and chicken in packets and things like this, if you go to a supermarket, because we're so distanced from the food itself. Particularly meats and processed meats and things. No idea how stuff is made. If people knew, I think it's terrible that we have this blind spot for the most important area of our health.
Let's talk about diets. You've done a lot of work and kind of spoken a lot about whether diets work, what types of diets work, etc., etc. Could you give us a little kind of information on that? Do diets work?
In one word, no, but there's also a caveat that for most people they don't work. Okay, so if in terms of a diet, you're talking about a restriction in calories. So someone says, right, the average woman has supposed to have, there's no such thing as the average woman though, but if there was, have 2,000 calories a day, and they say, okay, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to reduce my calories by more than 500, or go to 1,500 calories a day, I'm going to count my calories. Very few people can actually do that accurately, but say they were really strict and they went to 1,000 calories, they say, I'm going to eat half of everything for the next 6 weeks. They will lose weight. If you manage it, you will lose weight. But what we see is that the vast majority of people regain that weight because your body reacts. It gets increasingly harder to keep those calories off. Your brain is screaming at you, eat, eat, eat. It sees, you start dreaming about food, you get delirious, and you get a bad mood, and your metabolism slows down. So your body's conserving its energy, so you're actually using less. So you tail off, you don't continue losing weight, it pretty much stops. So you have to get more and more extreme all the time to keep losing that weight. And this is what all the studies have shown, is that after a couple of years, 80% of people have either gone back to where they were or have gone back above it.
Okay.
So there are a few exceptions, and when I've said this before, people say, oh, that's not true, I managed it very well. Those people are rare exceptions. And so the idea of dieting with a purely calorie restriction goes against all the science and all the data that we have. And these properly done studies. And that's in controlled trials. So you imagine you've got all these scientists looking at you, encouraging you to carry on, nurses phoning you up and saying, oh, how are you doing? Huge motivation. Most people don't have that anyway. So that 80% figure is probably 95% in real life. So that's why diets don't work if you're focusing on calories. And I think we have to give up the idea of the short term, unless you would just want it short term. But I think people realize there is a bounce back. And often people who go through this cycle of sort of feast and famine do worse long term. So they end up more overweight 20 years later. And we've done some studies on twins where one was doing this dieting, the other one wasn't. Although they started the same place, the dieting one ended up more overweight than the one who didn't bother. So, but what we do believe, particularly with my company Zoe, is that changing what you eat does have a big effect. So firstly, cutting out ultra-processed foods will make you less hungry. You won't have those hunger pangs and you'll probably be eating less. And cutting out some of these sugar spikes and fat spikes will also reduce your hunger pangs and the sort of stress on your body as well. So just shifting to eating proper food and eating for your gut will help. But you're not going to get a dramatic weight loss. But you've got to think, do you want a dramatic weight loss if it's going to rebound? No. You want to do something gradual that's going to, you can sustain for years. So little things like time restricted eating, where you're eating in a shorter window, helps a little bit. Changing from ultra processed foods to real foods helps a little bit. Reducing your sugar spikes and your fat spikes using something like the Zoe program also works. But it's not the quick fix that the diet industry wants you to believe. It's not taking liquid meal replacements, and it's not what people believe. And so the industry would like you to continue eating ultra processed foods, just have half the amount of it and carry on, still being sick, still having terrible gut microbes, and sort of cycling between these episodes. So it's about understanding food, really. And I think that's why everything we talk about is trying to not just sort of give someone a recipe they don't understand, or they just got to follow it blindly for X weeks. It's got to be re-educating people so you know about food for the rest of your life, and you can stay healthy, because it's not all about weight anyway. I mean, I'm a big believer that we need to sort of heal people from the inside out rather than the outside in. And that if you sort out your gut microbes, the rest will naturally follow. And it won't be dramatic, but it will be sustained. And you won't be, having any rebounds in a year's or 2 years' time. I think that's really important, because we, got to realize how unhealthy this country is compared to our ancestors, and how our guts we've lost half our gut microbes in the last 100 years. They've just disappeared because we're not giving them fiber, not giving them real food. We're hitting them with antibiotics. We're hitting them with junk food, all these things.
Let's talk about antibiotics, because I am always surprised about how little understanding there is of how dangerous it is to be taking antibiotics for everything. I'm going to call out my friends here. I recently went on a holiday and we went to Indonesia, which obviously is kind of well known for getting parasites and, what they call barley belly, etc., etc. And both the people I went on holiday with brought antibiotics in case, which I understand the kind of idea of, but instantly, as soon as they got this bug, started taking them. I've always been told, and I come from a family of science background, so I'm pretty on it with this, but I've always kind of been told, not to take antibiotics unless it's really needed. And recently as well, my boyfriend had sepsis and had a recurrence of it, and was given so many antibiotics. And obviously, thank God he hadn't taken a lot of antibiotics for the rest of his life, because they were able to work really effectively. And that almost shocked me into being like, oh God, really need to avoid taking them for everything. But you are prescribed them for a lot of things that you go to the doctors with, or general practitioners, etc. Now, what should we generally be doing in terms of kind of taking antibiotics for illnesses, infections, whatever it might be?
Yeah, we were taught that there really is no downside to antibiotics.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
It's like Smarties, you just take them.
Fix it.
A bit like artificial sweeteners. It's a free, 0 calories, total pleasure, and that's nonsense. We know that both animal studies and some human studies have shown that if you take them regularly, it can cause increase in weight. Right. It increases allergies in children. So children who had lots of antibiotics have more food allergies.
Oh, okay.
And also you get antibiotic resistance, which sort of affects everybody, so that the next generation will have no antibiotics left that are going to treat a really bad infection that's life-threatening. So there's huge problems about this overuse. We use about 2 or 3 times as many antibiotics as the Nordic countries. Right. And we're still sicker than them, so we're overusing it, although we underuse it compared to some countries. So there are still, I think, the US and some places in southern Europe use it, but it's the idea, they give it to animals to make them grow faster and get fatter. Okay. So next time your friends are thinking of taking an antibiotic course, say, well, it's likely to, give you a tendency to put on weight and food allergy. You might be less keen to take something just in case. Also dangerous. Some people take it, multiple antibiotics can end up with really nasty gut infections.
Right, yeah, of course.
That can be virtually uncurable. And it wipes out all the normal microbes in their gut. Everyone responds differently to antibiotics as well. We don't understand why. Some people seem to be quite resistant to it. Their bugs sort of fight back and don't really change. Others, it totally changes their gut microbes. But if you just think about how important your gut microbes are to your health, you really don't want to be taking unnecessary antibiotics. But it can be life saving. But we saw there was this recent scare, about strep throat.
Right.
Suddenly, we ran out of penicillin because there was a mad rush. Every time anyone got a sore throat, they wanted to take this, when 95% of it was viral and had no benefit, and probably
more harm.
Made the infection last a bit longer because you were damaging your immune system. So it's we overuse it, definitely, and people just need to think there's always a downside to everything, and that everything you put in your mouth, whether it's a food or a chemical, is going to have some interaction with your gut microbes. Some people pop some pills like they're called proton pump inhibitors. You can get over the counter for indigestion.
Okay. They
all change the acidity of your gut and your microbe profiles, subtly change, so making you more liable to infections. So nearly all these medicines we take have some downsides, and it's quite interesting because the reason antidepressants don't work in some people is because we've got different microbes, and you need the microbes to break down the antidepressant into the chemical that is good for your brain. So we're just learning all this stuff. It's very recent.
Yeah.
But it just shows you that be wary of everything you put in your mouth. You know, and it has a consequence.
Yeah. I want to talk quickly about the keto diet. Obviously, it's an incredibly popular diet and has been for a long time. I know you've spoken about it before, about whether it works, whether it maybe doesn't work. Could you speak a little bit about that?
So the keto diet, which classically means you're eating really just fats and proteins, and you try to have 70% of your meal as fats. I mean, some of them are milder than that, but that was the original sort of extreme one where your body's in ketosis. Works very well for childhood epilepsy. Okay, right. That was the original reason it was used.
Okay.
We still don't really understand why. It's something to do with the salts. The microbes produce these bile salts in your liver when they get lots of fat, and so these have some amazing effects on the brain. And a lot of people lost weight as well from this. So there are some people that seem to benefit from these diets. Nearly everyone loses weight short term. Some people find it incredibly hard to do. Others find it very easy.
Yeah, I tried it once. It turned into a monster, like a real monster.
And it goes back to this idea that we're all very individual when it comes to how you respond to any foods or diets. And so I absolutely believe people that say that it really works for them and they feel much better on it. But I think those numbers of people is quite small. And most people, the average person, isn't going to do well long term on a keto diet, although they might lose weight temporarily and then they'll put it on afterwards. If you have diabetes, interestingly, type 2 diabetes, a lot of people, and you're obese, a lot of people do well initially by cutting out all the carbs and going on that. So there's a small group of people that do well on this. Most people tend to struggle with it, don't find it helpful, feel unwell. And this is probably because we all respond to fats very differently. And the Zoe studies have shown that if you test everyone with the same fatty muffin, which when you do it, you'll find out you eat this fatty muffin, and then 6 hours later you've got to do a blood test on your skin prick test. How much fat is remaining in your blood varies like 10 to 20 fold between normal people.
Yeah.
So if you get rid of that fat really easily, you'll probably cope well with a high fat diet.
Yeah.
And if it's still hanging around, it causes inflammation and stress to your body.
Yeah.
So there's this huge variability between people that I think explains why you get these different reactions, but also why it's wrong for people to say the keto diet's for everybody.
Right.
But my main problem with the keto diet is that it's not good for your gut microbes long term.
Sure.
For all the reasons we explained. If you're not having vegetables, fiber, carbohydrates, then you're not nourishing your gut microbes, and they get very unbalanced, and long term that's going to be bad. So it's not, to my mind, a long-term sustainable diet, although for some people with diabetes or obesity, it might be worth a way of kickstarting that particular problem, but it's a very specific group of people.
Right. So obviously we've been taught, I guess for, well, most of my life at least, like these ideas on how to lose weight, how to, get towards a physical goal you might be going for. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking, well, cool, everything I thought works doesn't work, what would be, and they wanted to lose weight, what would be the biggest pieces of advice you'd give them in terms of kind of top tips to being able to lose weight?
Well, the first is to understand what you're eating better, be able to separate ultra-processed food and real food, look at how your eating times, are important, whether you might want to skip breakfast, stop snacking, do these sort of habit things that even before you get to worrying about how much do I eat. A lot of the how you eat, I think, is really important to sort out. Look at your diet objectively. So most people, just by switching to a gut-friendly diet, will be able to, lose some weight, over the next few months. It may not come off like that, but they'll move towards that. And I think realizing they're not going to have the same frozen lasagna every night, or the frozen pizza, or the and not eating out takeaways all the time that contain all these other chemicals you wouldn't be putting into your home cooking, also have a big effect. So it's also realizing that some of the things that you thought should work for you don't. So there's a myth about exercise.
Go on, break the internet.
The internet's already broken, I think, but the numerous studies, proper clinical trials have shown that exercise does not work for the majority of people as a weight loss tool. So what that means is that as many people gain weight when they exercise as lose weight. So you might be lucky, you might be in that small 10% of people that find that it has a beneficial effect, but you're much more likely to have either no effect or actually put on weight because your body's reacting, thinking it's in our ancestors on the African savannas, doing a lot of exercise. What happens? Your body shuts down. It doesn't, its metabolism slows right down, makes you hungrier. And so that's what it's designed to do. And so unless you're doing extreme ultra marathons or Ironman,
Can confirm
which
or not.
most people aren't, I'm talking about the average sort of small amount of exercise, generally it will make you hungrier. So anything, you'll be putting back on anything you gain. So I'm all for exercise. It's fantastic for all parts of health, including mental health. And I know you and I both exercise. It's not a big deal, but don't use it initially as a weight loss tool.
Right.
There's some evidence that once you've managed to change your diet, your lifestyle, whatever, if you're exercising at the same time, it stops it creeping back.
Right. So it's a maintenance tool, and it kind of, yeah.
But a lot of people beat themselves up because they've said, I'm going to lose weight in January, I'm going to go to a gym, and they go on their treadmill, they do all this stuff, and they don't lose anything, and they get very depressed and bit of self-loathing and say it's all my fault and whatever, I'm useless, my skinny friends doing amazingly. I think this information is really vital.
Yeah.
because it means it's absolutely not your fault. It doesn't mean exercise is bad.
Yeah.
It just means you haven't focused on your diet. And all this nonsense that, many gyms try and sell you in January or whatever, is a false myth, not backed up by science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've always had specifically good results, I guess, from exercise. Perhaps I'm in that 10%. I think perhaps also I work a desk job, so I live a pretty sedentary life, and perhaps it's also that when I am adding more movement into my day, I may be less kind of bored in terms of like keeping my body active, and therefore, I don't know, maybe consuming less snacks or whatever it might be. I feel like I'm also happier when I'm less sedentary. As I kind of explained before we started the podcast, I always have, I'll have this few days where I'll be a little bit grumpier, I'll be a little bit more kind of tetchy and quick to frustration, and I'll realise it's because I actually haven't even walked anywhere kind of in the past few days, because I've just been zipping around doing as much work as possible. So I guess, obviously individualism, very important kind of when looking at this, but also, would you say finding what works for you and finding what maybe doesn't work for you, and maybe not just taking kind of people's recommendations at face value?
Absolutely. That's exactly my whole message really on all these lifestyle myths, is we're being told this works, and part of what I'm doing with my books and what we're doing with Zoe is to try and myth bust and say, well, actually this doesn't work for the average person.
Sure.
But as I said, we're all different.
Yeah.
We're all much more different than we've been led to believe. We can't just follow a recipe and everything is going to happen and we're going to get a six-pack and we'll be doing this and whatever. Everyone's got to find their own route through experimentation, through not believing a lot of the dogma that's out there. But don't expect miracles. Don't expect, it's like taking some magic supplement is going to make you lose weight, or take, this particular 2 minutes a day exercise is going to change your life. Or this particular food regime, really, limited food regime is going to revolutionize things. So, beware of the quick fix. Realize you are different. Do experiment. And everything's up for grabs. It's how you eat, what you do. And we've all got different lifestyles, so we've got to fit it in. And it's all changed since COVID anyway. This sort of mixed working. Sometimes you're at home, sometimes you're. We've got to find our new way and realize that a lot of people do it differently. And and it's like, are you a morning person, an evening person? There really are no clear rules now, and I think this is a bit of a challenge for us all, because we're not all doing the same thing. We're not doing the same jobs. We're all in very different environments, very different pressures and stresses. But don't get freaked out if what you do doesn't work. Just say, well, that just might be me. I had a great example. We did this big intermittent fasting study. So Zoe's got this free health app called the Zoe Health Study app, and we got 80,000 people to download it, and for the first time do time restricted eating, where they were just eating within a 10-hour window and then not eating for 14 hours. And amazingly, most people managed to do it for at least 3 weeks, but some people found it really hard. And I know a couple of my colleagues, Jonathan Wolfe and Sarah Berry, who they are the people that were just dreaming of food in that time. They wanted that snack, and they're snackers. They can't really go without a snack, and they found it really tough to do this. They're little and often eaters, and it was like the worst thing for them, this experience. Whereas I found it really easy, and most other colleagues of mine found it really easy as well. So it's trying to work out what type of eater you are. Are you a fidgeter who likes sort of nibbling lots of things, and that's fine, and you maintain good health that way. But everyone has to find what sort of person they are, and it changes. People say, well, every teenager doesn't like getting up early in the morning, right? But as you get older, that sort of starts to change. And I used to sleep till 3 in the afternoon. I don't know how I did it now, but but now I'm much more of a morning person. And the same is true in our eating habits as well. Menopause, we looked at, changes women's eating habits and how they respond to it in a very big way as well. So can't assume that everything that's been right for you is always going to work. And people know that because as a kid, as a teenager, they could eat anything, and they suddenly get towards 30 and suddenly, I can't do that. I'm suddenly putting on weight. This is terrible. It's because we're all changing. So it's just educating people about their bodies and about the changing environments and everything else, I think, is really important. So but it's complicated,
of course.
And that's what I try to get across. Food is complicated. Our bodies are complicated. We need to know more about it. And I think in the future, we'll all be using these apps to help us. And that's what the Zoe app does. It allows you to, pick up foods you think were healthy, scan it and see what your personal score is. And often I'm still surprised by some of the things that I pick up, because you can't retain all that knowledge.
Of course. And before we close out, I just want to, you mentioned intermittent fasting, and you mentioned skipping breakfast as a tool. Obviously this is something that we've been told kind of breakfast is the most important meal of the day, etc., etc. I've not necessarily bought it because I work very well on intermittent fasting. I find it makes me less hungry the next day. It makes me less susceptible to kind of grabbing whatever there is. Should we be skipping breakfast?
We should all try skipping breakfast. Some people do really well on breakfast, others don't. And what the studies now show, which is contrary to what's on the NHS and government guidelines, is that there's no harm in skipping breakfast. But some people find it really difficult and they overeat at lunch and they get very cranky. Other people, like perhaps you and I, happy to skip it, 5 times a week, but when there's a nice opportunity or you're in a nice hotel buffet, you're going to say, oh, this is nice, I'll have this. So I think for many, the studies show that generally your metabolism is improved if you just have 2 meals a day rather than 3 or 4 or 5 meals a day. But generally that it may be because you're just increasing that fasting period. And in a way, you could have breakfast if you ended up eating your dinner earlier, if you're a real breakfast lover. So give it a try, though. Tell everyone, try it for a week, see how you feel, and you may want to go on with it. There's nothing dangerous about it, as we were told. And it explains why some people just don't like breakfast. Most people don't wake up early hungry. Only a few people do.
That's really interesting.
And our ancestors probably didn't. I mean, when I was with this African tribe, the Hadza, who are hunter-gatherers still, they didn't have a word for breakfast. Didn't exist, so as a concept. And nobody ate anything before about 10:30, 11. So it's not really in our DNA. I think it's the breakfast cereal manufacturers have created a demand perfectly for us to
sweet
want
things
to sit
as well. Because I'm such a savoury person, and I hate a sweet breakfast.
You never liked Cocoa Pops, then?
I mean, specifically thanks to my parents, we actually weren't allowed anything with sugar, sugar in the first 3 ingredients. So none of that unless we were at a friend's house, in which case I'd have all of the Cocoa Pops.
And feel sick,
but I do think it's actually ended up now with me not necessarily, like I couldn't have something that sweet in the morning.
No, it's interesting. But, it's about how we've, been, as I said in my book, spoon-fed this stuff, that this is normal, and it's, you're a bad parent if you don't send your kids, to school with a full breakfast, and then now it's a snack, and now it's tea time, and so they're massively over consuming. So people want to give it a go out there, give intermittent fasting a go, but if it's not for you, don't worry about it. Find other ways to improve your health and diet. It's all about empowerment, really. Realizing you're not just getting some manufacturer's idea of what's good because it's got low calories on it. It's all about giving power back to the individual to make these choices, because these choices really are important, not just for you, but also, as I go in the book, for the planet as well, about climate change.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly interesting. You've turned my world upside down. I will be going and eating a banana as a snack. But thank you so much. It's been incredibly interesting.
My pleasure.